You know that feeling when you've been doing something the same way for decades, and suddenly someone walks in and says, "Hey, maybe we're all wrong?" That's exactly what's happening right now in the world of Formula One, and it involves arguably the greatest driver to ever sit inside a cockpit. Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion, is reportedly doing something that has never been done before in the history of Ferrari's racing division. And here's where it gets interesting. According to sources close to the development team, Hamilton is challenging an engineering philosophy that Ferrari has protected for more than 70 years. Yes, you heard that right. 7 decades of tradition, and one man is asking the tough questions that nobody else dared to ask. But here's the part that should genuinely worry every single competing team on the grid. If Hamilton succeeds in convincing Ferrari to change their approach for the 2026 engine regulations, the rest of the field might as well start preparing for second place before the season even begins. Now, before we dive into the technical details that will determine who dominates the next era of Formula One, let me ask you something. What happens when you combine the most successful driver in history with an engine philosophy that has never been properly challenged? You stick around because the answer might just reshape the entire sport as we know it. Now, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're sitting inside a meeting room at Ferrari's headquarters in Maranello, Italy. The walls are covered with photographs of legendary drivers from decades past. The air smells like coffee, leather, and the kind of stubborn pride that only comes from winning more races than any other team in history. And sitting at the head of the table is Lewis Hamilton, fresh off his shocking decision to leave Mercedes after 12 seasons. According to reports, the atmosphere in that room was not what anyone expected. See, most people assume that when a driver joins a new team, especially a team as iconic as Ferrari, they spend the first few months learning the ropes, understanding the culture, and keeping their opinions to themselves. That is not what happened here. Sources claim that Hamilton reportedly walked into his first major technical meeting and immediately started questioning the fundamental principles behind Ferrari's power unit design. And not in a subtle way either. We're talking about direct, pointed questions about why Ferrari continues to prioritize certain engine characteristics that, according to Hamilton's experience at Mercedes, might actually be holding them back. But here's where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Ferrari's engine philosophy has always been unique. While other manufacturers focused on different priorities, Ferrari traditionally built their power units to deliver maximum output in a very specific way. According to engineering sources, Ferrari engines have historically been designed to produce their peak power at higher engine speeds, which creates a distinctive driving characteristic that their drivers have had to adapt to for generations. It's like driving a car that only shows you its full personality when you push it to the absolute limit. Sounds exciting, right? Well, here's the problem. The 2026 regulations are completely changing the game, and what worked beautifully for 70 years might suddenly become a massive disadvantage. This is where Hamilton's experience becomes absolutely crucial. After spending more than a decade with Mercedes, who built their championship dominance on a completely different engine philosophy, Hamilton reportedly sees something that Ferrari's own engineers might have missed. Let me explain why this matters so much. The new 2026 power unit regulations are arguably the biggest technical shakeup in Formula One history. According to official documents, the new engines will have nearly 50% electrical power output, which is a massive jump from where we are today. And here's the part that engineers are losing sleep over. The internal combustion engine and the electrical motor need to work together in ways they never have before. It's not simply about raw horsepower anymore. It's about how smoothly the power is delivered, how the energy recovery systems interact with the combustion engine, and how the driver can actually use all that technology without feeling like they're wrestling with the car every single lap. According to Hamilton, this is exactly where Ferrari's traditional approach might fall apart. Now, I want you to understand the scale of what we're talking about here. Ferrari has won more than 240 Grand Prix. They've built engines that have powered some of the most legendary cars in automotive history. And for more than 70 years, their fundamental approach to engine design has remained surprisingly consistent. It's not that Ferrari hasn't evolved or improved. Of course they have. But the core DNA, the basic DNA of how their engines deliver power, has remained recognizable across generations. And according to sources close to the situation, Hamilton is essentially asking them to reconsider that DNA, not just tweak it around the edges, but genuinely rethink some of the most basic assumptions about how their power unit should behave. That takes courage. It also takes a level of credibility that very few drivers in history have ever possessed. But here's what makes this story genuinely compelling. Hamilton isn't just complaining or making demands without offering solutions. According to team insiders, he came prepared with data, with examples from his Mercedes years, and with a clear vision of what the 2026 regulations actually require from a driver's perspective. See, most engineers have never driven a Formula One car at its absolute limit. They understand the theory, the numbers, the simulations, but they don't know what it feels like when the rear tires are at 90% of their grip limit and the car is sliding through a high-speed corner at 200 kilometers per hour. Hamilton does, and according to reports, he's using that experience to challenge Ferrari's engineers in ways they've never been challenged before.
Alleged that during one particularly intense meeting, Hamilton reportedly asked a question that left the room silent. He wanted to know why Ferrari's engine macking philosophy seemed designed to make the car more difficult to drive rather than easier. That's a bold statement, and you can probably imagine how that landed in a room full of engineers who have dedicated their entire careers to building those engines. Let me take you deeper into the technical battle that is apparently unfolding behind closed doors at Ferrari, because this isn't just about one driver having an opinion. This is about two completely different philosophies of how to build a championship-winning Formula One car. On one side, you have the Ferrari tradition, and on the other side, you have the Mercedes approach that delivered 8 consecutive constructors' championships. According to engineering sources who have worked with both teams, the difference comes down to something called drivability. Now, I know that sounds like a simple concept, but trust me, it is anything but simple when you're dealing with over 1,000 horsepower and a car that weighs less than a small family sedan. Ferrari's traditional approach, according to sources, prioritizes peak power output, even if that power comes in a way that is more difficult for the driver to manage. It's like giving someone a tool that is incredibly powerful, but also incredibly hard to control. In the hands of a skilled driver, that tool can produce magic, but it requires constant attention, constant adjustment, and constant management. Mercedes, on the other hand, took a different path during their dominant years. According to technical analysis, their power unit philosophy focused on creating an engine that was not just powerful, but also predictable and manageable. The power delivery was smoother, the torque curve was more linear, and the driver could focus more on racing and less on simply surviving the car's power delivery. And here's the part that Ferrari's engineers are apparently wrestling with right now. Hamilton believes that the 2026 regulations will reward the Mercedes philosophy far more than the Ferrari philosophy. According to his analysis, the new engines will have so much electrical power that the way the combustion engine and electric motor interact will determine success more than raw peak horsepower. And if the combustion engine delivers its power in a peaky, aggressive way, the electrical systems will constantly be fighting to smooth things out rather than adding performance. Now, I want to share something that really puts this whole situation in perspective. Ferrari has not won a driver's championship since 2007. That's nearly 2 decades of waiting for their fans. And in that time, Mercedes won 8 consecutive constructors' titles, while Hamilton himself matched Ferrari's all-time record of 5 consecutive drivers' championships. So when Hamilton walks into a meeting and starts explaining why Ferrari's approach needs to change, he's not just sharing an opinion, he's sharing the blueprint that beat them for the better part of a decade. According to sources, that reality is not lost on Ferrari's engineering leadership. They hired Hamilton not just because he's fast, but because he brings knowledge and experience from the most dominant team in the modern era. And apparently he's delivering exactly what they paid for, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. But let me pause here and give you my honest take on this situation, because as someone who has followed this sport for years, I find this absolutely fascinating. Think about the courage it takes for a 70-plus-year-old company, a company that defines Italian pride and engineering excellence, to listen to a driver who just joined the team and accept that maybe they've been doing something wrong for generations. That doesn't happen easily. There have to be internal debates, bruised egos, and probably more than a few raised voices behind closed doors. And yet, according to reports, Ferrari's management is actually listening. They didn't bring Hamilton to Maranello just to drive the car they gave him. They brought him to help them build something better. And if that means challenging 70 years of tradition, well, apparently that's exactly what's happening right now. The timeline here is crucial to understand. The 2026 regulations are already set. Teams have been working on their new power units for years at this point, because engine development in Formula One is not something you can rush. According to industry sources, Ferrari had already made significant progress on their 2026 engine before Hamilton even signed his contract. They had established their design direction, made critical decisions about architecture and philosophy, and were well into the development process. And then Hamilton arrived and reportedly started asking questions that made everyone reconsider those decisions. That is not a small thing. Changing direction mid-development is expensive, time-consuming, and risky. But apparently, Hamilton's arguments were compelling enough that Ferrari is at least considering modifications to their approach. Here's what makes the 2026 regulations so different from anything we've seen before. The new power units will split the power roughly 50-50 between the internal combustion engine and the electrical systems. That is a massive change from today's engines, where the internal combustion engine still provides the majority of the power. According to technical experts, this changes everything about how the engine should be designed. In the past, you could accept some rough edges in the power delivery because the combustion engine was dominant and the driver could work around those rough edges. But when half the power is coming from electric motors that are naturally smooth and linear, any rough edges from the combustion engine become magnified. It's like trying to have a conversation with someone who whispers half the time and shouts the other half. The contrast makes the rough parts feel even rougher. And this, according to sources, is exactly the problem that Hamilton identified. Ferrari's traditional engine philosophy, with its peaky power delivery and high engine speed characteristics, might have worked beautifully in the past.
But in the hybrid-heavy future of 2026, that philosophy could become a fundamental weakness. Hamilton reportedly argued that Ferrari needs to design an engine that is not just powerful, but also cooperative, an engine that works with the electrical systems rather than fighting against them. And according to team insiders, that argument has gained traction because the logic is simply undeniable. You cannot have half your power coming from smooth electric motors and the other half coming from an engine that behaves like a wild animal. The two halves need to dance together, not wrestle each other for control. Now, I need to be careful here because I'm not an engineer, and I don't want to pretend that I understand every technical detail of what's happening inside Ferrari's engine department. But the reports from credible sources suggest that Hamilton has identified a genuine weakness in Ferrari's approach that their own engineers might have missed because they've been doing things the same way for so long. This is actually a common problem in highly specialized fields. When you've been successful doing things a certain way, it becomes difficult to see the flaws in your approach. You start to assume that the way you do things is simply the right way, rather than one possible way among many. And it often takes an outsider, someone who hasn't been indoctrinated into the culture, to point out what everyone else has been missing. Let me tell you what this means for the competitive landscape of Formula One going forward. Because if Ferrari actually listens to Hamilton and changes their engine philosophy, we could be looking at a complete reversal of the current power structure. According to Paddock insiders, Mercedes and Red Bull have been watching this situation very closely, and what they're seeing apparently concerns them. See, Ferrari already has some inherent advantages heading into the 2026 regulations. They're one of only 4 power unit manufacturers in the sport, which gives them complete control over their engine development. They have resources that most teams can only dream about, and now they have a driver who has won more races than anyone in history, telling them exactly how to build a car that suits modern driving styles. That is a dangerous combination for anyone hoping to beat them. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. According to sources close to the Ferrari team, Hamilton's influence might extend beyond just engine philosophy.
He is reportedly also challenging their approach to car development, their simulation methods, and even their driver development programs. It is alleged that Hamilton has been asking questions about everything from steering wheel ergonomics to brake pedal feel, from suspension geometry to aerodynamic balance, and in each case, according to team insiders, his questions reveal a level of detailed understanding that has impressed even the most skeptical engineers. This is not a driver who simply shows up, drives fast, and leaves. This is a driver who genuinely understands how every system on the car works and how those systems interact with each other. I want to share an example that really illustrates what I'm talking about. According to one report, Hamilton spent several hours with Ferrari's simulation team discussing how they model tire temperatures during long runs. Now, tire temperature might sound like a boring technical detail, but in Formula One, it is absolutely critical. Tires that are too cold have no grip. Tires that are too hot lose performance and wear out quickly, and the window between too cold and too hot can be as narrow as a few degrees. According to sources, Hamilton noticed that Ferrari's simulation models didn't accurately reflect certain tire behaviors that he experienced regularly at Mercedes, and instead of just accepting the difference, he reportedly worked with the team to understand why their models were different and whether those differences might represent a weakness in their approach. That is the level of detail we're talking about here. Now, let me address the elephant in the room. Is this actually going to work? Can one driver really change a 70-year-old company's engineering philosophy in a matter of months? The honest answer is that nobody knows yet. According to industry observers, Ferrari's engineers are reportedly split on Hamilton's recommendations. Some apparently agree with him completely and see the logic in changing direction. Others are more skeptical, arguing that Ferrari's traditional philosophy has produced some of the most successful engines in history, and that changing course based on one driver's opinion, even a driver as accomplished as Hamilton, is risky. And here's the part that makes this situation so compelling. Both sides might actually be right. Ferrari's traditional philosophy has absolutely produced incredible results over the years, but the 2026 regulations are so different from anything that came before that past success might not predict future results. Let me give you some historical context that makes this whole situation feel even more significant. The last time Ferrari made a major philosophical shift in their engine design was the early 2000s, when they moved away from their traditional V10 architecture. That change, driven by regulation changes and the influence of Ross Brawn, produced the most dominant car in Ferrari's history. Michael Schumacher won 5 consecutive championships with those cars, and Ferrari established itself as the team to beat for nearly a decade. According to historians, that period of Ferrari dominance came precisely because the team was willing to challenge their own assumptions and evolve their philosophy. And now, 20 years later, we might be seeing history repeat itself, with Hamilton playing the role of the outsider who helps Ferrari see what they've been missing. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. According to recent reports, some of Ferrari's competitors are apparently hoping that Hamilton fails to change the team's philosophy, not because they dislike Hamilton, but because they're genuinely worried about what a fully optimized Ferrari power unit would look like. According to sources from rival
teams, there is a belief in the paddock that Ferrari's traditional engine approach is actually holding back their true potential. If Hamilton succeeds in unlocking that potential, the thinking goes, Ferrari could become almost unbeatable. And that prospect is apparently keeping more than a few team principals awake at night. It's a strange situation where Ferrari's rivals are actually rooting for Ferrari to stick with their traditional approach because the alternative might be too scary to contemplate. I want to take a moment here and share my perspective on what this all means. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion based on following this sport for years, Hamilton's approach here is exactly what Ferrari has been missing. For too long, Ferrari has relied on their heritage, their history, their tradition, as if those things alone could win championships. But racing doesn't care about your history. Racing only cares about results. And the results show that Ferrari hasn't won a driver's championship since 2007. That's not tradition, that's a drought. And breaking a drought requires new thinking, new voices, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. Hamilton is providing those uncomfortable conversations, whether Ferrari likes it or not. And if the team is smart, they'll listen. The specific technical areas where Hamilton is reportedly pushing for changes. According to engineering sources, there are three main areas of focus. First, the engine's power delivery characteristics. Second, the integration between the combustion engine and the electrical systems. And third, the overall drivability of the power unit from the driver's perspective. In each of these areas, Hamilton is apparently arguing for a shift away from Ferrari's traditional approach and towards something closer to what Mercedes perfected during their championship years. Now, I want to be clear about something. Hamilton isn't asking Ferrari to simply copy Mercedes. That would be impossible, even if they wanted to, because the regulations are different and the engineering culture is different. What he's reportedly asking for is for Ferrari to understand why Mercedes' approach worked so well and to apply those principles to their own unique engineering solutions. The power delivery characteristics are probably the most important area of focus. According to technical analysis, Ferrari engines have traditionally been designed to produce their maximum power at very high engine speeds. This creates an engine that feels incredibly exciting when you're pushing hard, but it also creates challenges when you're not at the absolute limit. The power comes in a rush, almost like a switch being flipped, which requires the driver to be incredibly precise with their throttle inputs. Hamilton reportedly believes that this characteristic, while exciting, actually hurts consistency over a full race distance. According to his experience, a smoother power delivery allows the driver to be more consistent lap after lap, to manage tire wear more effectively, and to focus on race strategy rather than simply trying to control the car. The integration between the combustion engine and electrical systems is another crucial area. According to sources, Hamilton has reportedly been asking detailed questions about how Ferrari's energy recovery systems interact with the engine mapping. In the Mercedes system, the electrical power was used strategically to fill in the gaps in the combustion engine's power delivery, creating a smoother overall experience. In Ferrari's traditional approach, the electrical systems were apparently designed to complement the engine's peaky characteristics, rather than smooth them out. Hamilton reportedly believes that for 2026, this approach needs to be reversed. The electrical systems should be used to smooth out the combustion engine's rough edges, not to amplify them. And according to team insiders, this argument has apparently gained significant support among Ferrari's younger engineers, who see the logic in Hamilton's reasoning. The third area, overall drivability, is perhaps the hardest to quantify, but potentially the most important. According to drivers who have raced for both Ferrari and Mercedes, there is a noticeable difference in how the two cars feel from behind the steering wheel. Mercedes cars have historically been described as more predictable, more forgiving, and easier to drive at the limit. Ferrari cars have been described as more emotional, more aggressive, and more demanding of the driver. Neither approach is inherently better or worse. It comes down to personal preference and driving style. But Hamilton's preference, based on 12 years of championship success, is clearly for the Mercedes approach. And now he's at Ferrari, reportedly trying to convince them to build a car that feels more like what he's used to. That is either genius or madness, depending on your perspective. Now, let me share something that really puts this whole situation in perspective. According to recent interviews with Ferrari's team principal, the organization is fully behind Hamilton's involvement in the development process. They didn't hire him just to drive. They hired him to contribute, to challenge, to bring his experience from Mercedes and apply it to their program. And according to sources, Hamilton has apparently taken that mandate very seriously. He's reportedly spending more time at the Ferrari factory than any driver in recent memory, attending engineering meetings that most drivers would avoid, and asking questions that reveal a deep understanding of the technical side of the sport. This is not a driver who shows up on race weekend, drives the car, and leaves. This is a driver who is fully invested in building something special. But here's the challenge that Ferrari faces. Changing an engineering philosophy that has been in place for 70 years is not easy. It requires more than just agreement in meetings. It requires changes to tools, processes, and even the way engineers think about problems. According to industry experts, Ferrari's entire simulation and development pipeline has been built around their traditional engine philosophy. Changing that philosophy means changing everything downstream from it. The aerodynamicists need different characteristics. The chassis designers need different parameters.